Section 15 of The American Crisis by Thomas Paine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Giordano. A Supernumerary Crisis to Sir Guy Carlton. Philadelphia, May 31st, 1782. It is the nature of compassion to associate with misfortune, and I address this to you in behalf even of an enemy, a captain in the British service, now on his way to the headquarters of the American army, and unfortunately doomed to death for a crime not his own. A sentence so extraordinary, an execution so repugnant to every human sensation, ought never to be told without the circumstances which produced it. And as the destined victim is yet in existence, and in your hands rests his life or death, I shall briefly state the case and the melancholy consequence. Captain Huddy of the Jersey militia was attacked in a small fort on Tom's River by a party of refugees in the British pay and service, was made prisoner, together with his company, carried to New York, and lodged in the provost of that city. About 3 weeks after which he was taken out of the provost down to the waterside, put into a boat, and brought again upon the Jersey shore, and there, contrary to the practice of all nations but savages, was hung up on a tree, and left hanging till found by our people, who took him down and buried him. The inhabitants of that part of the country where the murder was committed sent a deputation to General Washington with a full and certified statement of the fact. Struck, as every human breast must be, with such brutish outrage, and determined both to punish and prevent it for the future, the general represented the case to General Clinton, who then commanded and demanded that the refugee officer who ordered and attended the execution, and whose name is Lippincott, should be delivered up as a murderer, and in case of refusal, that the person of some British officer should suffer in his stead. The demand, though not refused, has not been complied with, and the melancholy lot, not by selection, but by casting lots, has fallen upon Captain Asgill, of the Guards, who, as I have already mentioned, is on his way from Lancaster to camp, a martyr to the general wickedness of the cause he engaged in, and the ingratitude of those whom he served. The first reflection which arises on this black business is, what sort of men must Englishmen be, and what sort of order and discipline do they preserve in their army, when in the immediate place of their headquarters, and under the eye and nose of their commander-in-chief, a prisoner can be taken at pleasure from his confinement, and his death made a matter of sport. The history of the most savage Indians does not produce instances exactly of this kind. They, at least, have a formality in their punishments. With them it is the horridness of revenge, but with your army it is a still greater crime, the horridness of diversion. The British generals who have succeeded each other, from the time of General Gage to yourself, have all affected to speak in language that they have no right to. In their proclamations, their addresses, their letters to General Washington, and their supplications to Congress, for they deserve no other name, they talk of British honor, British generosity, and British clemency, as if those things were matters of fact; whereas, we whose eyes are open, who speak the same language with yourselves, many of whom were born on the same spot with you, and who can no more be mistaken in your words than in your actions, can declare to all the world, that so far as our knowledge goes, there is not a more detestable character, nor a meaner or more barbarous enemy, than the present British one. With us you have forfeited all pretensions to reputation, and it is only by holding you like a wild beast, afraid of your keepers, that you can be made manageable. But to return to the point in question. Though I can think no man innocent who has lent his hand to destroy the country which he did not plant, and to ruin those that he could not enslave, yet, abstracted from all ideas of right and wrong on the original question, Captain Asgill, in the present case, is not the guilty man. The villain and the victim are here separated characters. You hold the one, and we the other. You disown, or affect to disown and reprobate the conduct of Lippincott. Yet you give him a sanctuary, and by so doing you as effectually become the executioner of Asgill, as if you had put the rope on his neck, and dismissed him from the world. Whatever your feelings on this interesting occasion may be are best known to yourself. Within the grave of your own mind lies buried the fate of Asgill. He becomes the corpse of your will, or the survivor of your justice. Deliver up the one, and you save the other. Withhold the one, and the other dies by your choice. On our part the case is exceeding plain. An officer has been taken from his confinement and murdered, and the murderer is within your lines. Your army has been guilty of 1,000 instances of equal cruelty, but they have been rendered equivocal and sheltered from personal detection. Here the crime is fixed, and is one of those extraordinary cases which can neither be denied nor palliated, and to which the custom of war does not apply. For it never could be supposed that such a brutal outrage would ever be committed. It is an original in the history of civilized barbarians, and is truly British. On your part, you are accountable to us for the personal safety of the prisoners within your walls. Here can be no mistake. They can neither be spies, nor suspected as such. Your security is not endangered, nor your operations subjected to miscarriage, by men immured within a dungeon. They differ in every circumstance from men in the field, and leave no pretence for severity of punishment. But if to the dismal conditions of captivity with you must be added the constant apprehensions of death, if to be imprisoned is so nearly to be entombed, and if, after all, the murderers are to be protected, and thereby the crime encouraged, wherein do you differ from American Indians either in conduct or character? We can have no idea of your honor or your justice in any future transaction, of what nature it may be, while you shelter within your lines an outrageous murderer, and sacrifice in his stead an officer of your own. If you have no regard to us, at least spare the blood which it is your duty to save. Whether the punishments will be greater on him who, in this case, innocently dies, or on him whom sad necessity forces to retaliate, is, in the nicety of sensation, an undecided question. It rests with you to prevent the sufferings of both. You have nothing to do but to give up the murderer, and the matter ends. But to protect him, be he who he may, is to patronize his crime, and to trifle it off by frivolous and unmeaning inquiries is to promote it. There is no declaration you can make, nor promise you can give, that will obtain credit. It is the man, and not the apology, that is demanded. You see yourself pressed on all sides to spare the life of your own officer, for die he will if you withhold justice. The murder of Captain Huddy is an offence not to be borne with, and there is no security which we can have that such actions or similar ones shall not be repeated, but by making the punishment fall upon yourselves. To destroy the last security of captivity, and to take the unarmed, the unresisting prisoner to private and sportive execution, is carrying barbarity too high for silence. The evil must be put an end to, and the choice of persons rests with you. But if your attachment to the guilty is stronger than to the innocent, you invent a crime that must destroy your character. And if the cause of your king needs to be so supported, for ever cease, sir, to torture our remembrance with the wretched phrases of British honor, British generosity, and British clemency. From this melancholy circumstance, learn, sir, a lesson of morality. The refugees are men whom your predecessors have instructed in wickedness, the better to fit them to their master's purpose. To make them useful, they have made them vile, and the consequence of their tutored villainy is now descending on the heads of their encouragers. They have been trained like hounds to the scent of blood, and cherished in every species of desolate barbarity. Their ideas of right and wrong are worn away in the constant habitude of repeated infamy, till, like men practised in execution, they feel not the value of another's life. The task before you, though painful, is not difficult. Give up the murderer and save your officer, as the first outset of a necessary reformation. Signed, Common Sense. End of A Supernumerary Crisis by Thomas Paine. Recording by Giordano, Newport Richey, Florida.
Section 16 of The American Crisis by Thomas Paine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bruce Kachuk. The Crisis Number 12, to the Earl of Shelburne. Published Philadelphia, October 29, 1782. My Lord, a speech which has been printed in several of the British and New York newspapers as coming from your lordship, in answer to one from the Duke of Richmond of the 10th of July last, contains expressions and opinions so new and singular, and so enveloped in mysterious reasoning, that I address this publication to you for the purpose of giving them a free and candid examination. The speech I allude to is in these words, quote, "His lordship said it had been mentioned in another place that he had been guilty of inconsistency. To clear himself of this, he asserted that he still held the same principles in respect to American independence which he at first imbibed. He had been, and yet was of opinion, whenever the Parliament of Great Britain acknowledges that point, the sun of England's glory is set forever. Such were the sentiments he possessed on a former day, and such the sentiments he continued to hold at this hour. It was the opinion of Lord Chatham, as well as many other able statesmen. Other noble lords, however, think differently, and as a majority of the cabinet support them, he acquiesced in the measure, dissenting from the idea. And the point is settled for bringing the matter into the full discussion of Parliament, where it will be candidly, fairly, and impartially debated. The independence of America would end in the ruin of England, and that a peace patched up with France would give that proud enemy the means of yet trampling on this country. The sun of England's glory he wished not to see set forever. He looked for a spark at least to be left, which might in time light us up to a new day. But if independence was to be granted, if Parliament deemed that measure prudent, he foresaw, in his own mind, that England was undone. He wished to God that he had been deputed to Congress, that he might plead the cause of that country as well as of this, and that he might exercise whatever powers he possessed as an orator to save both from ruin, in a conviction to Congress that, if their independence was signed, their liberties were gone forever. Peace, his lordship added, was a desirable object, but it must be an honorable peace, and not an humiliating one, dictated by France or insisted on by America. It was very true that this kingdom was not in a flourishing state. It was impoverished by war. But if we were not rich, it was evident that France was poor. If we were straitened in our finances, the enemy were exhausted in their resources. This was a great empire. It abounded with brave men, who were able and willing to fight in a common cause. The language of humiliation should not, therefore, be the language of Great Britain. His lordship said that he was not afraid nor ashamed of those expressions going to America. There were numbers, great numbers there, who were of the same way of thinking, in respect to that country being dependent on this, and who, with his lordship, perceived ruin and independence linked together." Thus far the speech on which I remark that his lordship is a total stranger to the mind and sentiments of America, that he has wrapped himself up in fond delusion that something less than independence may, under his administration, be accepted, and he wishes himself sent to Congress to prove the most extraordinary of all doctrines, which is, that independence, the sublimest of all human conditions, is loss of liberty. In answer to which we may say that in order to know what the contrary word dependence means, we have only to look back to those years of severe humiliation, when the mildest of all petitions could obtain no other notice than the haughtiest of all insults, and when the base terms of unconditional submission were demanded, or undistinguishable destruction threatened. It is nothing to us that the ministry have been changed, for they may be changed again. The guilt of a government is the crime of a whole country, and the nation that can, though but for a moment, think and act as England has done, can never afterwards be believed or trusted. There are cases in which it is as impossible to restore character to life as it is to recover the dead. It is a phoenix that can expire but once, and from whose ashes there is no resurrection. Some offenses are of such a slight composition that they reach no further than the temper, and are created or cured by a thought. But the sin of England has struck the heart of America, and nature has not left in our power to say we can forgive. Your lordship wishes for an opportunity to plead before Congress the cause of England and America, and to save, as you say, both from ruin. That the country which for more than 7 years has sought our destruction should now cringe to solicit our protection is adding the wretchedness of disgrace to the misery of disappointment. And if England has the least spark of supposed honor left, that spark must be darkened by asking, and extinguished by receiving, the smallest favor from America. For the criminal who owes his life to the grace and mercy of the injured is more executed by living than he who dies. But 1,000 pleadings, even from your lordship, can have no effect. Honor, interest, and every sensation of the heart would plead against you. We are a people who think not as you think, and what is equally true, you cannot feel as we feel. The situations of the two countries are exceedingly different. Ours has been the seat of war. Yours has seen nothing of it. The most wanton destruction has been committed in our sight. The most insolent barbarity has been acted on our feelings. We can look round and see the remains of burnt and destroyed houses, once the fair fruit of hard industry, and now the striking monuments of British brutality. We walk over the dead whom we loved in every part of America, and remember by whom they fell. There is scarcely a village but brings to life some melancholy thought, and reminds us of what we have suffered, and of those we have lost by the inhumanity of Britain. 1,000 images arise to us, which, from situation, you cannot see, and are accompanied by as many ideas which you cannot know, and therefore your supposed system of reasoning would apply to nothing, and all your expectations die of themselves. The question whether England shall accede to the independence of America, and which your lordship says is to undergo a parliamentary discussion, is so very simple, and composed of so few cases, that it scarcely needs a debate. It is the only way out of an expensive and ruinous war, which has no object, and without which acknowledgment there can be no peace. But your lordship says the sun of Great Britain will set whenever she acknowledges the independence of America, whereas the metaphor would have been strictly just to have left the sun wholly out of the figure, and have ascribed her not acknowledging it to the influence of the moon. But the expression, if true, is the greatest confession of disgrace that could be made, and furnishes America with the highest notions of sovereign independent importance. Mr. Wedderburn, about the year 1776, made use of an idea of much the same kind. "Relinquish America," says he. "What is it but to desire a giant to shrink spontaneously into a dwarf?" Alas, are those people who call themselves Englishmen of so little internal consequence that when America is gone, or shuts her eyes upon them, their sun is set. They can shine no more, but grope about in obscurity, and contract into insignificant animals? Was America, then, the giant of the empire, and England only her dwarf in waiting? Is the case so strangely altered that those who once thought we could not live without them are now brought to declare that they cannot exist without us? Will they tell to the world, and that from their first minister of state, that America is their all in all, that it is by her importance only that they can live, and breathe, and have a being? Will they, who long since threatened to bring us to their feet, bow themselves to ours, and own that without us they are not a nation? Are they become so unqualified to debate on independence that they have lost all idea of it themselves, and are calling to the rocks and mountains of America to cover their insignificance? Or, if America is lost, is it manly to sob over it like a child for its rattle, and invite the laughter of the world by declarations of disgrace? Surely a more consistent line of conduct would be to bear it without complaint, and to show that England, without America, can preserve her independence and a suitable rank with other European powers. You were not contented while you had her, and to weep for her now is childish. But Lord Shelburne thinks something may yet be done. What that something is, or how it is to be accomplished, is a matter in obscurity. By arms there is no hope. The experience of nearly 8 years, with the expense of £100 million sterling and the loss of 2 armies, must positively decide that point. Besides, the British have lost their interest in America with the disaffected. Every part of it has been tried. There is no new scene left for delusion, and the thousands who have been ruined by adhering to them, and have now to quit the settlements which they had acquired, and be conveyed like transports to cultivate the deserts of Augustine and Nova Scotia, has put an end to all further expectations of aid. If you cast your eyes on the people of England, what have they to console themselves with for the millions expended? Or what encouragement is there left to continue throwing good money after bad? America can carry on the war for 10 years longer, and all the charges of government included, for less than you can defray the charges of war and government for 1 year. And I, who know both countries, know well that the people of America can afford to pay their share of the expense much better than the people of England can. Besides, it is their own estates and property, their own rights, liberties, and government that they are defending. And were they not to do it, they would deserve to lose all, and none would pity them. The fault would be their own, and their punishment just. The British Army in America care not how long the war lasts. They enjoy an easy and indolent life. They fatten on the folly of one country and the spoils of another, and, between their plunder and their prey, may go home rich. But the case is very different with the laboring farmer, the working tradesman, and the necessitous poor in England, the sweat of whose brow goes day after day to feed, in prodigality and sloth, the army that is robbing both them and us. Removed from the eye of that country that supports them, and distant from the government that employs them, they cut and carve for themselves, and there is none to call them to account. But England will be ruined, says Lord Shelburne, if America is independent. Then, I say, is England already ruined, for America is already independent. And if Lord Shelburne will not allow this, he immediately denies the fact which he infers. Besides, to make England the mere creature of America is paying too great a compliment to us and too little to himself. But the declaration is a rhapsody of inconsistency. For to say, as Lord Shelburne has numberless times said, that the war against America is ruinous, and yet to continue the prosecution of that ruinous war for the purpose of avoiding ruin, is a language which cannot be understood. Neither is it possible to see how the independence of America is to accomplish the ruin of England after the war is over, and yet not effect it before. America cannot be more independent of her, nor a greater enemy to her hereafter than she now is, nor can England derive less advantages from her than at present. Why then is ruin to follow in the best state of the case, and not in the worst? And if not in the worst, why is it to follow at all? That a nation is to be ruined by peace and commerce, and 14 or 15 millions a year less expenses than before, is a new doctrine in politics. We have heard much clamor of national savings and economy. But surely the true economy would be to save the whole charge of a silly, foolish, and headstrong war, because, compared with this, all other retrenchments are bubbles and trifles. But is it possible that Lord Shelburne can be serious in supposing that the least advantage can be obtained by arms, or that any advantage can be equal to the expense or the danger of attempting it? Will not the capture of one army after another satisfy him? Must all become prisoners? Must England ever be the sport of hope and the victim of delusion? Sometimes our currency was to fail. Another time our army was to disband. Then whole provinces were to revolt. Such a general said this and that. Another wrote so and so. Lord Chatham was of this opinion, and Lord somebody else of another. Today 20,000 Russians and 20 Russian ships of the line were to come. Tomorrow the Empress was abused without mercy or decency. Then the Emperor of Germany was to be bribed with $1 million of money, and the King of Prussia was to do wonderful things. At one time it was, lo, here, and then it was, lo, there. Sometimes this power, and sometimes that power, was to engage in the war, just as if the whole world was mad and foolish like Britain. And thus, from year to year, has every straw been catched at, and every will-o'-the-wisp led them a new dance. This year a still newer folly is to take place. Lord Shelburne wishes to be sent to Congress, and he thinks that something may be done. Are not the repeated declarations of Congress, and which all America supports, that they will not even hear any proposals whatever until the unconditional and unequivocal independence of America is recognized? Are not, I say, these declarations answer enough? But for England to receive anything from America now, after so many insults, injuries, and outrages acted towards us, would show such a spirit of meanness in her that we could not but despise her for accepting it. And so far from Lord Shelburne's coming here to solicit it, it would be the greatest disgrace we could do them to offer it. England would appear a wretch indeed, at this time of day, to ask or owe anything to the bounty of America. Has not the name of Englishman blots enough upon it, without inventing more? Even Lucifer would scorn to reign in heaven by permission, and yet an Englishman can creep for only an entrance into America. Or has a land of liberty so many charms that to be a doorkeeper in it is better than to be an English minister of state? But what can this expected something be? Or, if obtained, what can it amount to but new disgraces, contentions, and quarrels? The people of America have for years accustomed themselves to think and speak so freely and contemptuously of English authority, and the inveteracy is so deeply rooted that a person invested with any authority from that country, and attempting to exercise it here, would have the life of a toad under a harrow. They would look on him as an interloper, to whom their compassion permitted a residence. He would be no more than the Mungo of a farce, and if he disliked that, he must set off. It would be a station of degradation, debased by our pity and despised by our pride, and would place England in a more contemptible situation than any she has yet been in during the war. We have too high an opinion of ourselves even to think of yielding again the least obedience to outlandish authority, and for 1,000 reasons England would be the last country in the world to yield it to. She has been treacherous, and we know it. Her character is gone, and we have seen the funeral. Surely she loves to fish in troubled waters, and drink the cup of contention, or she would not now think of mingling her affairs with those of America. It would be like a foolish dotard, taking to his arms the bride that despises him, or who has placed on his head the ensigns of her disgust. It is kissing the hand that boxes his ears, and proposing to renew the exchange. The thought is as servile as the war is wicked, and shows the last scene of the drama to be as inconsistent as the first. As America is gone, the only act of manhood is to let her go. Your lordship had no hand in the separation, and you will gain no honor by temporizing politics. Besides, there is something so exceedingly whimsical, unsteady, and even insincere in the present conduct of England, that she exhibits herself in the most dishonorable colors. On the 2nd of August last, General Carlton and Admiral Digby wrote to General Washington in these words, quote, "The resolution of the House of Commons of the 27th of February last has been placed in your Excellency's hands, and intimations given at the same time that further pacific measures were likely to follow. Since which, until the present time, we have had no direct communications with England. But a mail is now arrived which brings us very important information. We are acquainted, sir, by authority, that negotiations for a general peace have already commenced at Paris, and that Mr. Grenville is invested with full powers to treat with all the parties at war, and is now at Paris in execution of his commission. And we are further, sir, made acquainted that His Majesty, in order to remove any obstacles to this peace which he so ardently wishes to restore, has commanded his ministers to direct Mr. Grenville that the independence of the 13 United Provinces should be proposed by him in the first instance, instead of making it a condition of a general treaty." End quote. Now, taking your present measures into view, and comparing them with the declaration in this letter, pray what is the word of your king, or his ministers, or the Parliament, good for? Must we not look upon you as a confederated body of faithless, treacherous men, whose assurances are fraud, and their language deceit? What opinion can we possibly form of you, but that you are a lost, abandoned, profligate nation, who sport even with your own character, and are to be held by nothing but the bayonet or the halter? To say after this that the sun of Great Britain will be set whenever she acknowledges the independence of America, when the not doing it is the unqualified lie of government, can be no other than the language of ridicule, the jargon of inconsistency. There were thousands in America who predicted the delusion, and looked upon it as a trick of treachery, to take us from our guard, and draw off our attention from the only system of finance by which we can be called, or deserve to be called, a sovereign, independent people. The fraud on your part might be worth attempting, but the sacrifice to obtain it is too high. There are others who credited the assurance because they thought it impossible that men who had their characters to establish would begin with a lie. The prosecution of the war by the former ministry was savage and horrid, since which it has been mean, trickish, and delusive. The one went greedily into the passion of revenge, the other into the subtleties of low contrivance, till, between the crimes of both, there is scarcely left a man in America, be he Whig or Tory, who does not despise or detest the conduct of Britain. The management of Lord Shelburne, whatever may be his views, is a caution to us, and must be to the world, never to regard British assurances. A perfidy so notorious cannot be hid. It stands even in the public papers of New York, with the names of Carlton and Digby affixed to it. It is a proclamation that the King of England is not to be believed, that the spirit of lying is a governing principle of the ministry. It is holding up the character of the House of Commons to public infamy, and warning all men not to credit them. Such are the consequences which Lord Shelburne's management has brought upon his country. After the authorized declarations contained in Carlton and Digby's letter, you ought, from every motive of honor, policy, and prudence, to have fulfilled them, whatever might have been the event. It was the least atonement that you could possibly make to America, and the greatest kindness you could do to yourselves, for you will save millions by a general peace, and you will lose as many by continuing the war. Signed, Common Sense. P.S. The manuscript copy of this letter is sent your lordship by the way of our headquarters to New York, enclosing a late pamphlet of mine addressed to the Abbé Raynal, which will serve to give your lordship some idea of the principles and sentiments of America. Signed, C.S. End of The Crisis No. 12 by Thomas Paine. Section 17 of The American Crisis by Thomas Paine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bruce Kachuk. The Crisis No. 13. Thoughts on the Peace and Probable Advantages Thereof. Published Philadelphia, April 19, 1783. The times that tried men's souls, footnote, these are the times that try men's souls, the Crisis No. 1, published December 1776, end footnote, are over, and the greatest and completest revolution the world ever knew, gloriously and happily accomplished. But to pass from the extremes of danger to safety, from the tumult of war to the tranquillity of peace, though sweet in contemplation, requires a gradual composure of the senses to receive it. Even calmness has the power of stunning when it opens too instantly upon us. The long and raging hurricane that should cease in a moment would leave us in a state rather of wonder than enjoyment, and some moments of recollection must pass before we could be capable of tasting the felicity of repose. There are but few instances in which the mind is fitted for sudden transitions. It takes in its pleasures by reflection and comparison, and those must have time to act before the relish for new scenes is complete. In the present case, the mighty magnitude of the object, the various uncertainties of fate it has undergone, the numerous and complicated dangers we have suffered or escaped, the eminence we now stand on, and the vast prospect before us, must all conspire to impress us with contemplation. To see it in our power to make a world happy, to teach mankind the art of being so, to exhibit, on the theatre of the universe, a character hitherto unknown, and to have, as it were, a new creation entrusted to our hands, are honors that command reflection, and can neither be too highly estimated nor too gratefully received. In this pause, then, of recollection, while the storm is ceasing and the long agitated mind vibrating to a rest, let us look back on the scenes we have passed, and learn from experience what is yet to be done. Never, I say, had a country so many openings to happiness as this. Her setting out in life, like the rising of a fair morning, was unclouded and promising. Her cause was good, her principles just and liberal, her temper serene and firm, her conduct regulated by the nicest steps, and everything about her wore the mark of honor. It is not every country, perhaps there is not another in the world, that can boast so fair an origin. Even the first settlement of America corresponds with the character of the Revolution. Rome, once the proud mistress of the universe, was originally a band of ruffians. Plunder and rapine made her rich, and her oppression of millions made her great. But America need never be ashamed to tell her birth, nor relate the stages by which she rose to empire. The remembrance, then, of what is past, if it operates rightly, must inspire her with the most laudable of all ambition, that of adding to the fair fame she began with. The world has seen her great in adversity, struggling, without a thought of yielding, beneath accumulated difficulties, bravely, nay proudly, encountering distress and rising in resolution as the storm increased. All this is justly due to her, for her fortitude has merited the character. Let, then, the world see that she can bear prosperity, and that her honest virtue in time of peace is equal to the bravest virtue in time of war. She is now descending to the scenes of quiet and domestic life, not beneath the cypress shade of disappointment, but to enjoy in her own land, and under her own vine, the sweet of her labors, and the reward of her toil. In this situation may she never forget that a fair national reputation is of as much importance as independence, that it possesses a charm that wins upon the world, and makes even enemies civil, that it gives a dignity which is often superior to power, and commands reverence where pomp and splendor fail. It would be a circumstance ever to be lamented and never to be forgotten, were a single blot, from any cause whatever, suffered to fall on a revolution, which to the end of time must be an honor to the age that accomplished it, and which has contributed more to enlighten the world and diffuse a spirit of freedom and liberality among mankind than any human event, if this may be called one, that ever preceded it. It is not among the least of the calamities of a long-continued war that it unhinges the mind from those nice sensations which at other times appear so amiable. The continual spectacle of woe blunts the finer feelings, and the necessity of bearing with the sight renders it familiar. In like manner are many of the moral obligations of society weakened, till the custom of acting by necessity becomes an apology, where it is truly a crime. Yet let but a nation conceive rightly of its character, and it will be chastely just in protecting it. None ever began with a fairer than America, and none can be under a greater obligation to preserve it. The debt which America has contracted, compared with the cause she has gained, and the advantages to flow from it, ought scarcely to be mentioned. She has it in her choice to do, and to live as happily as she pleases. The world is in her hands. She has no foreign power to monopolize her commerce, perplex her legislation, or control her prosperity. The struggle is over, which must one day have happened, and perhaps never could have happened at a better time. And instead of a domineering master, she has gained an ally whose exemplary greatness and universal liberality have extorted a confession, even from her enemies. Insert, that the Revolution began at the exact period of time best fitted to the purpose is sufficiently proved by the event. But the great hinge on which the whole machine turned is the union of the states, and this union was naturally produced by the inability of any one state to support itself against any foreign enemy without the assistance of the rest. Had the states severally been less able than they were when the war began, their united strength would not have been equal to the undertaking, and they must, in all human probability, have failed. And, on the other hand, had they severally been more able, they might not have seen, or, what is more, might not have felt, the necessity of uniting, and, either by attempting to stand alone or in small confederacies, would have been separately conquered. Now, as we cannot see a time, and many years must pass away before it can arrive, when the strength of any one state, or several united, can be equal to the whole of the present United States, and as we have seen the extreme difficulty of collectively prosecuting the war to a successful issue, and preserving our national importance in the world, therefore, from the experience we have had, and the knowledge we have gained, we must, unless we make a waste of wisdom, be strongly impressed with the advantage as well as the necessity of strengthening that happy union which had been our salvation, and without which we should have been a ruined people. While I was writing this note, I cast my eye on the pamphlet Common Sense, from which I shall make an extract, as it exactly applies to the case. It is as follows: quote, "I have never met with a man, either in England or America, who has not confessed it as his opinion that a separation between the countries would take place one time or other. And there is no instance in which we have shown less judgment than in endeavoring to describe what we call the rightness or fitness of the continent for independence. As all men allow the measure, and differ only in their opinion of the time, let us, in order to remove mistakes, take a general survey of things, and endeavor, if possible, to find out the very time. But we need not to go far. The inquiry ceases at once, for the time has found us. The general concurrence, the glorious union of all things, prove the fact. It is not in numbers, but in a union, that our great strength lies. The continent is just arrived at that pitch of strength in which no single colony is able to support itself, and the whole, when united, can accomplish the matter, and either more or less than this might be fatal in its effects." End insert. With the blessings of peace, independence, and an universal commerce, the states, individually and collectively, will have leisure and opportunity to regulate and establish their domestic concerns, and to put it beyond the power of calumny to throw the least reflection on their honor. Character is much easier kept than recovered, and that man, if any such there be, who, from sinister views or littleness of soul, lends unseen his hand to injure it, contrives a wound it will never be in his power to heal. As we have established an inheritance for posterity, let that inheritance descend, with every mark of an honorable conveyance. The little it will cost, compared with the worth of the states, the greatness of the object, and the value of the national character, will be a profitable exchange. But that which must more forcibly strike a thoughtful, penetrating mind, and which includes and renders easy all inferior concerns, is the union of the states. On this our great national character depends. It is this which must give us importance abroad and security at home. It is through this only that we are, or can be, nationally known in the world. It is the flag of the United States which renders our ships and commerce safe on the seas or in a foreign port. Our Mediterranean passes must be obtained under the same style. All our treaties, whether of alliance, peace, or commerce, are formed under the sovereignty of the United States, and Europe knows us by no other name or title. The division of the empire into states is for our own convenience, but abroad this distinction ceases. The affairs of each state are local. They can go no further than to itself, and were the whole worth of even the richest of them expended in revenue, it would not be sufficient to support sovereignty against a foreign attack. In short, we have no other national sovereignty than as United States. It would even be fatal for us if we had, too expensive to be maintained, and impossible to be supported. Individuals or individual states may call themselves what they please, but the world, and especially the world of enemies, is not to be held in awe by the whistling of a name. Sovereignty must have power to protect all the parts that compose and constitute it, and as United States we are equal to the importance of the title, but otherwise we are not. Our union, well and wisely regulated and cemented, is the cheapest way of being great, the easiest way of being powerful, and the happiest invention in government which the circumstances of America can admit of, because it collects from each state that which, by being inadequate, can be of no use to it, and forms an aggregate that serves for all. The states of Holland are an unfortunate instance of the effects of individual sovereignty. Their disjointed condition exposes them to numerous intrigues, losses, calamities, and enemies, and the almost impossibility of bringing their measures to a decision, and that decision into execution, is to them, and would be to us, a source of endless misfortune. It is with confederated states as with individuals in society. Something must be yielded up to make the whole secure. In this view of things we gain by what we give, and draw an annual interest greater than the capital. I ever feel myself hurt when I hear the Union, that great palladium of our liberty and safety, the least irreverently spoken of. It is the most sacred thing in the Constitution of America, and that which every man should be most proud and tender of. Our citizenship in the United States is our national character. Our citizenship in any particular state is only our local distinction. By the latter we are known at home, by the former to the world. Our great title is Americans. Our inferior one varies with the place. So far as my endeavors could go, they have all been directed to conciliate the affections, unite the interests, and draw and keep the mind of the country together. And the better to assist in this foundation work of the Revolution, I have avoided all places of profit or office, either in the state I live in or in the United States, kept myself at a distance from all parties and party connections, and even disregarded all private and inferior concerns. And when we take into view the great work which we have gone through, and feel, as we ought to feel, the just importance of it, we shall then see that the little wranglings and indecent contentions of personal parley are as dishonorable to our characters as they are injurious to our repose. It was the cause of America that made me an author. The force with which it struck my mind, and the dangerous condition the country appeared to me in, by courting an impossible and an unnatural reconciliation with those who were determined to reduce her, instead of striking out into the only line that could cement and save her, a declaration of independence, made it impossible for me, feeling as I did, to be silent. And if, in the course of more than 7 years, I have rendered her any service, I have likewise added something to the reputation of literature by freely and disinterestedly employing it in the great cause of mankind, and showing that there may be genius without prostitution. Independence always appeared to me practicable and probable, provided the sentiment of the country could be formed and held to the object, and there is no instance in the world where a people so extended and wedded to former habits of thinking, and under such a variety of circumstances, were so instantly and effectually pervaded by a turn in politics as in the case of independence, and who supported their opinion, undiminished, through such a succession of good and ill fortune, till they crowned it with success. But, as the scenes of war are closed, and every man preparing for home and happier times, I therefore take my leave of the subject. I have most sincerely followed it from beginning to end, and through all its turns and windings, and whatever country I may hereafter be in, I shall always feel an honest pride at the part I have taken and acted, and a gratitude to nature and Providence for putting it in my power to be of some use to mankind. Signed, Common Sense. End of The Crisis Number 13 by Thomas Paine. Section 18 of The American Crisis by Thomas Paine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bruce Kachuk. A Supernumerary Crisis. To the People of America. Published New York, December 9, 1783. In Rivington's New York Gazette of December 6th is a publication under the appearance of a letter from London, dated September 30th, and is on a subject which demands the attention of the United States. The public will remember that a treaty of commerce between the United States and England was set on foot last spring, and that until the said treaty could be completed, a bill was brought into the British Parliament by the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mr. Pitt, to admit and legalize, as the case then required, the commerce of the United States into the British ports and dominions. But neither the one nor the other has been completed. The commercial treaty is either broken off or remains as it began, and the bill in Parliament has been thrown aside. And in lieu thereof, a selfish system of English politics has started up, calculated to fetter the commerce of America by engrossing to England the carrying trade of the American produce to the West India Islands. Among the advocates for this last measure is Lord Sheffield, a member of the British Parliament, who has published a pamphlet entitled Observations on the Commerce of the American States. The pamphlet has two objects. The one is to allure the Americans to purchase British manufactures, and the other to spirit up the British Parliament to prohibit the citizens of the United States from trading to the West India Islands. Viewed in this light, the pamphlet, though in some parts dexterously written, is an absurdity. It offends in the very act of endeavoring to ingratiate, and his lordship, as a politician, ought not to have suffered the two objects to have appeared together. The latter alluded to contains extracts from the pamphlet, with high encomiums on Lord Sheffield for laboriously endeavoring, as the letter styles it, to show the mighty advantages of retaining the carrying trade. Since the publication of this pamphlet in England, the commerce of the United States to the West Indies in American vessels has been prohibited, and all intercourse, except in British bottoms, the property of and navigated by British subjects, cut off. That a country has a right to be as foolish as it pleases has been proved by the practice of England for many years past. In her island situation, sequestered from the world, she forgets that her whispers are heard by other nations, and in her plans of politics and commerce she seems not to know that other votes are necessary besides her own. America would be equally as foolish as Britain were she to suffer so great a degradation on her flag, and such a stroke on the freedom of her commerce, to pass without a balance. We admit the right of any nation to prohibit the commerce of another into its own dominions, where there are no treaties to the contrary. But as this right belongs to one side as well as the other, there is always a way left to bring avarice and insolence to reason. But the ground of security which Lord Sheffield has chosen to erect his policy upon is of a nature which ought, and I think must, awaken in every American a just and strong sense of national dignity. Lord Sheffield appears to be sensible that in advising the British nation and Parliament to engross to themselves so great a part of the carrying trade of America, he is attempting a measure which cannot succeed, if the politics of the United States be properly directed to counteract the assumption. But, says he in his pamphlet, it will be a long time before the American states can be brought to act as a nation. Neither are they to be feared as such by us. What is this more or less than to tell us that while we have no national system of commerce, the British will govern our trade by their own laws and proclamations as they please? The quotation discloses a truth too serious to be overlooked, and too mischievous not to be remedied. Among other circumstances which led them to this discovery, none could operate so effectually as the injudicious, uncandid, and indecent opposition made by sundry persons in a certain state to the recommendations of Congress last winter for an import duty of 5%. It could not but explain to the British a weakness in the national power of America, and encourage them to attempt restrictions on her trade, which otherwise they would not have dared to hazard. Neither is there any state in the Union whose policy was more misdirected to its interest than the state I allude to, because her principal support is the carrying trade, which Britain, induced by the want of a well-centered power in the United States to protect and secure, is now attempting to take away. It fortunately happened, and to no state in the Union more than the state in question, that the terms of peace were agreed on before the opposition appeared. Otherwise, there cannot be a doubt that if the same idea of the diminished authority of America had occurred to them at that time as has occurred to them since, but they would have made the same grasp at the fisheries as they have done at the carrying trade. It is surprising that an authority which can be supported with so much ease and so little expense, and capable of such extensive advantages to the country, should be cavilled at by those whose duty it is to watch over it, and whose existence as a people depends upon it. But this, perhaps, will ever be the case, till some misfortune awakens us into reason, and the instance now before us is but a gentle beginning of what America must expect, unless she guards her Union with nicer care and stricter honor. United, she is formidable, and that with the least possible charge a nation can be so. Separated, she is a medley of individual nothings, subject to the sport of foreign nations. It is very probable that the ingenuity of commerce may have found out a method to evade and supersede the intentions of the British in interdicting the trade with the West India Islands. The language of both being the same, and their customs well understood, the vessels of one country may, by deception, pass for those of another. But this would be a practice too debasing for a sovereign people to stoop to, and too profligate not to be discountenanced. An illicit trade, under any shape it can be placed, cannot be carried on without a violation of truth. America is now sovereign and independent, and ought to conduct her affairs in a regular style of character. She has the same right to say that no British vessel shall enter ports, or that no British manufactures shall be imported but in American bottoms, the property of, and navigated by, American subjects, as Britain has to say the same thing respecting the West Indies. Or she may lay a duty of 10, 15, or 20 shillings per ton, exclusive of other duties, on every British vessel coming from any port of the West Indies, where she is not admitted to trade, the said tonnage to continue as long on her side as the prohibition continues on the other. But it is only by acting in union, that the usurpations of foreign nations on the freedom of trade can be counteracted, and security extended to the commerce of America. And when we view a flag, which to the eye is beautiful, and to contemplate its rise and origin inspires a sensation of sublime delight, our national honor must unite with our interest to prevent injury to the one or insult to the other. Signed, Common Sense. End of A Supernumerary Crisis to the People of America by Thomas Paine. End of The American Crisis by Thomas Paine.